Okay, whatever. You didn't have a shirt on. Team Will or Team
yeah, but like also I have been wearing that suit
and
like
Twitter was falling.
15 hours. Don't have a backup. I did change shoes. So
I'm glad that it's not just.
yeah, my wife had 3 pairs. She had like the wedding one, she had the dance one, and she maybe get on the car. That's her. So it's a lot. Although I like
Right.
Like, which one? He thought it was, oh god, who's the crazy guy?
In Hollywood? Yeah. No.
Where you're running around.
The guy who was in like all the Chevy Chase movies.
The one who
Flies and says, I'm back.
Yeah, not getting a person to do this. And then just stayed up for an hour
all day live blog.
this whole rolling.
It did. Yeah. Really well.
Okay, well, we did read the email about our top story. But then you had 8 out of 10 were delivered to this.
I kept. I only wrote like 2 items for our budget blog, but I kept trying to wrangle in Will Smith at one.
Will Smith's still silent on budget.
You weren't ready for Will Smith yesterday. You weren't getting eyeballs.
Yeah, no, that was
Yeah. Says nothing about that is a reduction.
Will Smith might qualify.
Joe Biden smacking the millionaires. I want to make this happen.
Two-minute warning to press briefing. 2-minute warning to press briefing.
So actually, yeah, I guess that is a tax Why can't I get portals and the New York Times
It hasn't migrated there yet.
answer for it?
You know why? To do so, which would include everybody, so they're like, I might guess, my guess is they're taking it out.
What if you went to the New York Times app and the only thing there is New York Times log in is your phone?
Like,
I don't Okay. I've like refused to look at it.
That's something I do.
So I was just waiting to get a signature so I wouldn't have to like jump out.
Well, hey, Kate.
Hi, everyone. I know I am not the redhead you're accustomed to seeing at this podium, but I hope you will hang with me nonetheless, so thank you. Before I take your questions, I wanted to start with a little bit of a topper here. So as you all know, today is Vietnam Veterans Day, and I'd like to take a moment to highlight critical investments that the President announced yesterday as part of his budget to uphold our sacred obligation to veterans and address the mental health crisis. During his first State of the Union address, President Biden outlined a four-part unity agenda focused on areas where members of both parties can come together and make additional progress for the American people. The President's budget advances this unity agenda through targeted investments to take on the mental health crisis, accelerate progress against cancer, deliver on our commitment to veterans, and combat the opioid epidemic, all while cutting the deficit and not raising taxes on anyone earning less than $400,000 a year. The budget proposes transformative mental health reforms that would expand coverage, reduce costs, and increase the number of mental health providers. As we commemorate Vietnam Veterans Day, I wanted to highlight how the budget proposes funding to improve VA services, reduce veteran suicide, end veteran homelessness, and address military toxic exposures. And it tackles the opioid and overdose epidemic with significant investments to reduce the illicit supply of drugs in our communities and prevent substance use disorder, expand treatment, and help people recover. Today, I also wanted to celebrate another example of the success of the President's industrial policy, with Governor Roy Cooper announcing the electric vehicle maker VinFast is investing $4 billion to build electric vehicle and batteries in North Carolina. That's an investment that will create more than 7,000 jobs on top of the 423,000 manufacturing jobs created on the President's watch in his first year in office, the most in a single year since the early 1990s. We're building on that momentum with the bipartisan infrastructure law, which is making historic investments in our roads, bridges, airports, and more, along with things like EV charging stations that are critical for America to own emerging industries. And we have a chance to redouble that progress with the Bipartisan Innovation Act, which cleared through the Senate last night with a massive bipartisan majority. This is legislation that will boost manufacturing, strengthen our supply chains, lower prices, and boost our economic and national security by making more critical components like semiconductors right here in America. We look forward to the House of Representatives moving quickly to start the formal conference on that bill so we can get this to the President's desk as soon as possible. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions. Darlene, why don't you kick us off?
Thanks, Kate, and welcome.
Thank you.
I wanted to follow up with one question on the readout from the President's call earlier today with the European leaders. Can you say if they spent any time at all talking about his comment that Putin cannot remain in power or should not remain in power?
They did not. I spoke with the President about this earlier. They did not. They were incredibly aligned, however, and spoke to some of the key issues that we are focused on here, including supplying weapons to Ukraine, including increasing costs on Russia, continuing to increase sanctions, supporting stable energy markets, and, of course, the state of diplomatic negotiations. And obviously, the conversation today came on the heels of the President's successful trip to Europe last week, in which he stood with some of our European allies and announced efforts to redouble NATO forces on the eastern flank, to announce an additional $1 billion in humanitarian aid to Ukraine, and to continue to show incredible unity with our European partners and allies as we tackle this crisis in Russia.
Second question, is there any comment or reaction to the FDA approving a fourth booster shot for people over 50?
So this is a good thing, and it is a straightforward thing. The CDC and the FDA are now allowing and will make available booster shots, a fourth shot for people over 50 and for the immunocompromised. We have plenty of supply to ensure that those populations can receive these shots. But what I would say is that if at some point it becomes recommended that the full population requires a fourth shot, we're going to need additional funding. We're going to need the additional funding we've requested of Congress to be able to provide those shots for the broader population. But we do have the supply, and people will be able to go. People in those populations over 50 and up will be able to go and get those shots. Thank you.
Mike Vinland. First, I wanted to ask about the talks that are happening underway in Turkey at the moment between the Russians and the Ukrainians. What is the White House's visibility into those discussions? And have U.S. officials seen any evidence to back up Russia's claims that they're pulling some of their forces back from Kyiv? Obviously, the president said he wanted to see what the Russians actually did versus what they said.
Yeah. So we are in close contact with the Ukrainians and are supportive of their efforts to engage in diplomacy and to try to reach a ceasefire. We are prepared to be helpful however we can and are focused on putting Ukraine in the strongest possible position both on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. We obviously continue to provide security assistance, to provide weapons, to ensure that they are able to push back on Russian aggression. And we continue to increase pressure on Putin and on Russia by imposing severe costs in partnership with our allies and partners. So we defer to the Ukrainians to discuss the specifics of the negotiations, but we are, of course, committed to a Ukraine that is sovereign, independent, and secure. And we are in constant conversation with the Ukrainian government and our allies and partners, but as always, we keep those conversations private. To your second question about Kyiv, obviously, and what we heard from the Russians today, you obviously heard the president address this and say that we'll need to watch and see if their actions meet their words. But I think we should be clear-eyed about the reality of what's happening on the ground, and no one should be fooled by Russia's announcements. We believe any movement of forces from around Kyiv is a redeployment and not a withdrawal, and the world should be prepared for a major offensive against other areas of Ukraine. Everyone should expect that we're going to continue to see attacks across Ukraine. Obviously, a key message that the president delivered on his trip to Europe last week was that we are in for a long slog, that our allies and partners need to remain, that our resolve needs to remain strong, and that we need to continue to execute on the strategy of inflicting significant cost on the Russian economy, and again, strengthening Ukraine on the battlefield and at the negotiating table.
And Kate, on the subject of the president's remarks in Poland about President Putin, obviously yesterday he tried to suggest that there was a distinction between his personal views of what he thought was a moral outrage versus an official policy position on the part of the United States. But you know full well something that candidate Joe Biden said virtually every day on the campaign trail, which is that the words of a president matter, that they can, as he often put it, lead a country into war. Is he not living up to the standard that he set himself during the campaign?
Absolutely not. I think the words of the president here were incredibly powerful. He spoke personally about the moral outrage that he felt, which is shared by people all across the world. It does not mean he is articulating a change in policy. It does not mean he's laying out a change in U.S. policy. He met with refugees, as again, many of you were on that trip and saw that firsthand some of the pain that Vladimir Putin has inflicted on people who are fleeing their homes and who are seeing their country war-torn. So this was an incredibly personal, powerful statement of moral outrage. It was not an articulation of a new U.S. policy. And I think both of those things can be and are true.
And you spent some time with the president. Last question, Kate. Is he frustrated, or does he regret that those words at the very end of the speech overshadowed a larger message, which obviously he put a lot of thought into in the days leading up?
Absolutely not. He spoke from the heart. He, as he always does, as you know very well from having covered him for a long time, as many of you do, and as the American people know, he speaks from the heart. He says what he feels, and no, he absolutely does not regret that in any way. Justin Singh.
Hey, Kate. Following on Darlene's question, will the president and vice president be receiving fourth booster shots, and do you have a sense of timeline on that?
So I can speak to the president, who will make this decision in consultation with his doctor. Obviously, if his doctor recommends that he receive a fourth booster, then he would, but he'll make that decision in consultation with his doctor. I will check on the vice president. I don't know.
And then earlier you were talking about the call on supporting stable energy markets. During the president's trip last week, there seemed to be momentum behind the idea of a coordinated strategic petroleum reserve release, and so I'm wondering if you can provide any update on whether that topic came up in the conversation today, or a time frame or outlook for that.
I can only say that they spoke to the stability of energy markets writ large and the need to keep them stable. I don't have any specifics to preview in terms of any coming announcements. What I would say more broadly, of course, is that obviously President Biden is very focused on ensuring that we minimize fluctuations as much as possible at the gas pump and prices in general for American families. He is doing everything he can to combat Putin's price hike here at home. That's why we did the initial coordinated release of 60 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. And he will continue to focus on this, but I don't have any specific preview that I can give you at this time.
And then last one, our friends over at the Journal yesterday reported that members of the Ukrainian peace negotiation team had exhibited signs of a potential poisoning. I'm wondering if that was something the U.S. has been aware of, tracking, and if you sort of ascribe responsibility to the Russians.
So we are certainly aware. We are obviously alarmed by these reports, especially given the fact that this is something that historically has been in Russia's playbook. But I do not have any confirmation at this time, except to say that we are aware.
Okay. Thanks, Kate. You just said, and the Pentagon is also saying the same thing, that any movement of forces in Ukraine, of Russian forces, is not a withdrawal but a repositioning. Is that based on intelligence, or what is that based on?
That is based on the fact that we need to see what the Russians actually do before we trust solely what they've said. We saw from the outset that they made an aggressive push toward Kyiv at the beginning of this conflict, and we have no reason to believe that they have adjusted that strategy. Obviously, we continue to do everything we can to impose costs for this decision. We will continue to execute on our strategy. But as you heard the president say, we are not going to take their word for it. We're going to wait to see what their actions look like.
And the British Prime Minister said today that they won't accept anything less than a full withdrawal of all Russian forces from Ukrainian territory. Does President Biden share that view that reduced military activity is not enough?
Well, we are going to allow the Ukrainians to execute on these negotiations. It's not our role to begin the negotiation. Again, our role is to strengthen Ukraine on the battlefield, to try to strengthen Ukraine at the negotiating table by applying these sanctions and costs to Russia. But I'm not going to prejudge or predetermine an outcome for that conversation.
And last question for you. Jared Kushner is set to testify before the January 6th committee on Thursday virtually. Has the White House had any communication with him about whether or not you're going to waive any executive privilege claims that he could make?
So obviously the president has spoken to the fact that January 6th was one of the darkest days in our country's history, and that we must have a full accounting of what happened to ensure that it never occurs again. And he's been quite clear that they posed a unique threat to our democracy, and that the constitutional protections of executive privilege should not be used to shield from Congress or the public information about an attack on the Constitution itself. And so as a result, the White House has decided not to assert executive privilege over the testimony of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump.
And have you communicated that to Jared Kushner's team, or is this?
I won't speak to private communication between our attorneys and his.
Thank you, Kate. Just sort of with Russia redeploying to focus on eastern Ukraine, what is your view on whether Russia should be allowed to retain control of the Donbass region? As you're aware, they have, just today said that, that is what their demand is. And I'm wondering if the U.S. has a formalized position on that.
So again, I am not going to prejudge where these negotiations ultimately net out. We are doing everything we can to provide weapons to the Ukrainian people so that they can turn back Russian aggression, and we're doing everything we can to impose severe costs on Russia and on the Russian economy. I am not going to prejudge the ultimate outcome, certainly not from standing here at this podium.
And just a quick question on the Deputy Treasury Secretary. He spoke a little while earlier and said there are more sanctions coming. This time they'll be focused on Russian supply chains. Are there any more details that you can potentially share with us on what that looks like and when that will happen?
So I don't have additional specifics that I can provide in terms of announcements coming at this time, except to say more broadly, that certainly we have hit in concert with our allies and partners. We have hit very hard at the things that Putin cares about the most. We've degrading his military, access to cutting-edge technology, chipping away at his chokehold on energy, an ability to project power and influence. And of course, we will continue to intensify. And we're not going to run out of options anytime soon. There are plenty of things that we can do, including broadening sanctions to new targets, deepening the severity of sanctions that are existing. So I don't have any specifics to announce at this time, except to say that there are certainly other options should we decide to move forward with them.
Quickly follow. Let me ask, just follow up on the January 6th committee. Liberals have suggested that they're disappointed with the way that the Justice Department under Attorney General Garland has approached the former president. How does the president feel about this question?
The president has the utmost respect for the independence of the Department of Justice and does not have any comment on that.
And so the sense here is that the president has confidence in the way the Justice Department has been handling all of these cases?
Again, I'm not going to speak to specific handling of cases. Obviously, the president has full faith in Attorney General Garland to run his department the way he sees fit.
Hey, on the president and the coronavirus, you said there'll be consultations about a fourth shot. I wonder with the president's recent travel overseas, with several members of the White House staff coming down with coronavirus, are there any additional measures or medication, anything else that's being done to sort of protect the president's health and welfare?
So, let me talk a little bit about some of the procedures and give you an overview of our policy here. So, the White House takes incredibly strong precautions in alignment and sometimes, as you all know, beyond CDC guidance to ensure that we're keeping a safe workplace, especially for the President of the United States. So all EOP, Executive Office of the President, employees who surround the President are tested on a regular cadence here on campus to screen for COVID. That is a step beyond CDC guidance to help lower the risk of COVID on campus. We do regular screening testing. The president's doctor determines if additional testing is needed in any given week in light of various considerations. So more specifically to your question, because of his travel this week, he will test in addition to his regular testing cadence. Everyone going into a meeting with one of the four principals is required to test ahead of time, and that's how we know about some of these positive cases in the first place. So for those employees who test positive, they're required to isolate in alignment with CDC guidance and must test negative before returning to work, which is also a step beyond CDC guidance. So we take every measure here to ensure that we are protecting the four principals and also protecting our staff and our workforce. But because of his travel, he will do some additional testing in addition to his regular cadence.
Sure. Just to follow up, I want to make sure I'm clear. What about any medications? Is he taking any additional medications or any other treatments or anything like that? I understand about the testing and about we all get tested when we get near the president. But is there anything else?
That's not something that I'm not going to get into private medical information from here, except to say that the president will receive additional testing as part of his cadence to ensure that he doesn't have COVID.
Yeah, thank you. Just to follow up on that, when was he last tested? And I guess we presume he was negative because he's with the Prime Minister.
Yes, I will get you the date. I want to say, I actually want to say it was yesterday, but because I think we announced it publicly yesterday. So I believe his last test was yesterday, and yes, it was negative.
He said yesterday that he would be willing to meet with President Putin again or talk to him. I'm wondering what specific circumstances need to be met for such a meeting to take place.
Well, I think he articulated pretty clearly that it would depend on what President Putin wanted to talk about. Now, I'm not going to set preconditions for a conversation between President Biden and President Putin, except to say that we have been very clear, and President Biden has been very clear, that there needs to be tangible de-escalation from Russia and a clear, genuine commitment to diplomacy before the president would have that kind of conversation.
Yeah, and on the COVID funding, do you have any update? I know you say you need the money, but do you have any update on the negotiations? It seems like there are serious conversations happening up on the Hill. Do you have any sense of when or how this might be resolved? Are you?
It's going to be important to ensure that we are well funded in the event that another variant comes along or in the event that we see another wave that we need to be prepared for. So, we view this funding as really critical. We've been working with Congress, as you know well, for the last several months. They know that we need the funding to stay ahead of the virus. They're also aware of some of the specific details, like, for example, that already the uninsured fund has stopped accepting claims. And we've been forced to cut monoclonal supply to states by a third this week. So there are real tangible impacts to not having this funding. I think there is widespread agreement that funding for vaccines, tests, and treatments is urgent and critical. And we need to see this urgency from Congress, and we're going to continue to push.
Thanks. Ukraine is now asking for security guarantees as part of these negotiations. What kinds of guarantees is the U.S. willing to provide to ensure Ukraine's sovereignty?
So these are not specifics that I'm prepared to be able to announce from this podium. Obviously, we are working very closely with Ukraine on a wide array of options, things to help ensure their sovereignty and ensure their security. Now, some of that is providing the weapons that we're providing. Some of that is continuing to push on sanctions and costs on Russia. But I don't have any specifics to preview for you on any discussions about security guarantees.
And on the concern over chemical weapons, with Russia now seeming to make some concessions and at least promising to reduce military activity, are you still as concerned that Russia could use chemical weapons, or is that threat seen as diminishing?
We continue to prepare for every contingency. We obviously take seriously a wide array of potential options. There has been reporting in the public sphere over the last weeks about all the work that our teams are doing to prepare for eventualities. So I'm not going to rate the likelihood of one or another outcome, except to say that our teams are preparing for all eventualities. And the president has been very clear that we will respond with severe consequences, as we have responded with severe consequences to every action Russia has taken up until this point.
And just a similar question with regards to China. Do you see Russia's promise to somehow pull back some of its forces as a sign that China is not willing to or will not be assisting them?
So I don't have any updated guidance beyond what you all heard from Jake, for example, last week about us not having seen any evidence of China providing any sort of military assistance to Russia.
Thank you, Kate. There are reports that the administration is going to require COVID vaccines for undocumented migrants at the southwest border, just as Title 42 is expected to end and right after the fourth shot got FDA approval. You just highlighted the impacts of not having enough COVID funding when it comes to paying for shots for the uninsured and sending shipments of treatments to states. So why would the administration give out free vaccines to undocumented migrants but not to, for instance, uninsured Americans?
Well, to be clear, we have the supply that we need in this moment to vaccinate Americans here in this country. I don't want to conflate those two things because I think that's not an accurate representation of what I said. We have the supply that we need to vaccinate Americans. What we are asking for is funding to prepare for future eventualities and to ensure that we have what we need as we move forward. Now, on your question about the border, this is nothing new. The effort to vaccinate migrants in our care and custody has been ongoing for months. ICE has been providing vaccines to migrants since the summer of 2021, and we're always assessing the situation and addressing protocols based on changing CDC guidance. But in order to ensure the safety of border communities, and the workforce, and the migrants themselves, DHS is now requiring age-appropriate vaccinations for non-citizens who are taken into Border Patrol custody. But again, this is consistent with overall CDC guidance for those entering the country, be it by air or land. And we know that vaccinating people is the best way to protect from the virus and to protect against the spread of the virus.
The New York Times story framed it as something that was about to get underway in certain sectors of the southwest border. Is this requirement for a vaccine? Is that accurate? Is that something that is going to take place? Because, and the reason I ask is, if you're talking about future supply, and this is a future effort, how are those two things not sort of in conflict?
Well, as I said, it is actually nothing new. I mean, we have been vaccinating migrants in our care and custody for many, many months. So ICE, as I said, has been providing vaccines to migrants since the summer of 2021. So this is not anything new, as we know that this is, again, the best way to protect people from the virus and to prevent the spread of the virus is to ensure that they're vaccinated.
Title 42 is about to end then?
I have no announcement that I can make on Title 42
and
at this time.
On Ukraine, Yesterday, did the president accidentally reveal a previously unknown effort for the U.S. to be training Ukrainian forces in Poland during his answer in the press conference?
No. The troops that he met with in Poland routinely interact with Ukrainians. That is something that's known. Many of you were, again, on the trip with us. That is something that's known. That is in no way revealing compromised information. That being said, there's nothing further that I have to say on that beyond what the president said yesterday.
Just to follow up, I know you said just now you don't have any news on Title 42, which expires on Friday, or at least the current use of it. When we were in Europe, the president announced that he's admitting 100,000 Ukrainian asylum seekers. They are exempt from Title 42. Why?
So obviously we are looking at an extreme crisis in Ukraine. I think it is easy to look at the incredible volume of displacement and the duress that people are under in Ukraine, and understand that we need to make efforts to ensure that we are moving to get them to places that are safe. What I can say more broadly about our efforts to